Okay, everyone, I'm going to call the meeting to reconvene the meeting to open session. Are there any public comments on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we can go ahead with the bond process discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Shields.
Thank you. As you know, we passed the bond in November. Yeah,
Fine, we'll do the pledge.
I'll make sure Lori corrects me.
Okay, everybody. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I apologize for this being like a committee meeting, not like a full board meeting, so
I don't want to
sorry about
become
that.
your flag pin.
Well, and it's not on the agenda, so I apologize for that. That's our...
No problem.
As you know, with the passage of the bond in November comes a lot of great work establishing kind of what we do and how we do, and so that the board feels confident in making all of those decisions and has the information they need to be confident in the decisions they make, which are going to be a lot of competing interests, a lot of different agendas, versus where we used to have just a site or two that we were raising from the ground. This is all of our sites getting different types of things and hearing from many different constituent groups with many different ideas about how these dollars would best be spent. So we want to make sure, A, that the board gets to meet the team we have assembled to do this work, and that they get to meet you and hear your concerns and hear what's important to you as this process unfolds, so that your values are incorporated into their work. We also want to make sure this is an opportunity for you to ask different questions. You all have different experiences with bond work. If you have things that have happened in the past that you like, if you've heard things that you know now you're going to want to hear more about, this again is a time to be upfront, open about that, so it can be incorporated into work plans as we move forward. We want to make sure we meet your needs. With that, I will let Steve take the floor, and then he'll introduce our team.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Sitting next to me is Steve Kwok from Petrocki Kwok Architects. We just call them QKA. There's also Aaron Jobson, and then John Dibzak, Meredith Johnson from DWK, who was our bond counsel, and then Greg Isom from Isom Advisors, who is the district's bond advisor.
Financial advisor.
Financial advisor. So with that, I'm going to turn over the program and the introduction of the PowerPoint to Steve Kwok.
Okay. Well, first, I'd like to say thank you very much for selecting our firm. We're absolutely honored to be here and delighted to be working in our own community. As you know, we're just down the street. So it's nice to be able to drive to a meeting in 5 minutes. It's actually really outstanding, so thank you for that. The other thing I need to do right off the bat is apologize for not having been here last week. There was a miscommunication, and somehow we didn't get the memo that we were supposed to be here, so I do apologize. But again, thank you for selecting us during that meeting, and I promise you that will be the last meeting that we miss. So anyway, just to give you, in case you don't have a great deal of knowledge about our firm, again, we are local, we're right down the street. Our firm has been in business for 29 years. We have been designing educational facilities that entire time. It is basically all that we do. We really enjoyed designing educational facilities, have a real passion for it, and believe that education is the key to so many of the issues that our community faces. So it's an important thing for us. We've also had the pleasure to work with the district for a number of years on a number of different projects. Pioneer Geospatial, we've actually done design work for the charter school for the arts over at Johnson Fremont Elementary School. We're just awaiting funding to get that done, but we're very excited to see that get into construction. And just very pleased to be here. So what we'd like to do is just run through some slides. And again, being a work study session, we really invite you to just, if things come up, something comes up, you have a question, please just let us know. And sometimes it's just easier to do it in the moment as we're going through the process. So I would invite you to please go ahead and do that. So this is a very kind of short timeline of the kind of the initial work that we need to get started with. What we'd like to do is really develop a facilities master plan for you so that we have a very good roadmap of how we want to improve the facilities within the district, do that in a very sort of rational, transparent, very credible way to the community. And so that's what we're going to be describing tonight. And so what we're hoping to do is show you some of what that means. So for instance, in the short run, we're really starting to look at doing things like establishing the organizational structure. And so what that means is really coming up with a management plan of how we're going to go through this process. How are we going to manage this entire enterprise? And it's a very large, it's a very complex, and it's a lot of work. It's a big task, and it's a big process. So we need to begin to develop that. Again, in the short term, if there are some things that the board really would like to see move forward that don't require all of the sort of general approvals that we need to do things with technology, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Begin to look at that immediately, and then really sort of launch into this master planning process, which is on the third arrow there. And then there's also the issue of the sale of bonds, and Greg will talk about that in a little bit. So and this is a very general sort of organizational diagram. So essentially in the upper left, we have the districts. So what we mean by the district is, of course, the board and the administration, working to run the district sort of day to day, but also this program for the bond. To the right, we have our community. They're the folks who approve the bond. We're going to be paying for the bond, and I'm sure we'll have a very strong voice in how we move forward. And also with our community at large, we also have our oversight committee. The oversight committee is basically just looking to make sure as we go forward in the master planning process and actually in the bond expenditure process that we are spending the monies in the way that was consistent with which the bond was put forward on the ballot and put forward to the community, and that's what they're looking for. So that's the role of the citizen. The capital facilities program team, there's in a slide or two, there's a whole list of all of the people in there, but it's basically the team that we're assembling now. It's district administration and then the various consultants, a number of who are already here in this room. Again, designing that process, moving that process forward. We will then get into, as we get further into the process and we start looking at projects, we'll have various design committees that will help give us input and guide this process. And then right down to the site level, where we'll be meeting with individual sites about what's planned for their site.
So the district design committee, is that like an ad hoc committee, or is this fluid depending upon what project you're working on in the
Yeah, this is very fluid, and because we haven't really developed that management plan yet. When that happens, then we can more clearly define what that committee is and who that is. Oftentimes that's a district-wide committee that sets standards for construction, and so it's that sort of level of work. So as promised, this is the CFP team members. So as you can see, there are different sort of groups of people. The financial folks, who Greg is representing, legal Meredith is representing, of course, us as your architects, and we're also doing your energy Prop 39 work. So we're in there as well. And there'll be other design consultants coming on board as we go along. Of course, once we get in construction, we'll have contractors and some construction management firms if that's what we'd like to do and that sort of thing. And then, of course, as we go through construction, we have to have our inspectors involved in the process. Okay. And so this is just a color-coded sort of who's already here. So people in the green, and now we'd like to be able to change the architects from blue to green. So now that we're here, but basically the green folks are the folks who've already been selected and already participating in the process. And then as we go forward, those other folks will be brought on. Oh, and our underwriter has been selected. So. Okay. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask John to come up and talk a little bit about ESA. We don't know exactly how much experience the board has with the division of the state architect, but we thought we'd give you just a very quick overview.
Thanks, Steve. So what I will start by saying with regards to the types of projects is that the master planning process itself does not involve the actual design of buildings or remodels to any of your campuses. That comes after the master planning process is complete. And the process of the master plan will result in a series of projects, hopefully at each of your campuses. And those projects are under the jurisdiction of the city architect's office, not local city or county government. So we refer to that agency as DSA. And most of your projects will fall under their jurisdiction. And it's important to discuss this now because of the timeline involved with your school projects. Once we are given the go-ahead to design a project, even a smaller project could take up to a year from the time we get to go ahead to begin design till it's completed with construction. Those are the simple projects. And a lot of that.
For example, one could be.
A modular classroom building could take a year. Half of that time is the DSA review process, which right now is about 5 to 6 months. So if we have a couple months to do all the design and put together the construction documents, we send it to DSA, and it'll take 5 to 6 months before we get that final approval from them, and then you have the construction.
So 5 to 6 months to determine whether or not they need to approve it.
Well, they'll approve it. Once we submit it to DSA,
Yeah.
it usually sits there for about 3 months,
Okay.
doing nothing, just getting in line to be reviewed. And then it takes them a month or so to review it and get us their comments, and then a month for us to address their comments, and then go back down and get the final approval.
Well, I'm just asking a question. This says the high priority projects do not require approval of division. So those are two separate things? No, DSA exempt, sorry.
Right.
Sorry, okay.
So what John brought up was a portable classroom. There are other examples, and we've actually got some listed on another slide. But
Okay.
things like re-roofing does not require DSA approval, or things like technology upgrades. If you're going to be putting wireless, or you're putting a new backbone or something like that, that generally does not require DSA approval. So those can take considerably less time. It's just a matter of designing them, getting them out to contract, and then under construction.
So, yeah, so where I was going with that is that, the master planning process is gonna take its own time, which we haven't really established how long it's gonna take. We wanna do it right, so it may take 6 months, it may take 8 months. Then if the projects after that could take another year. You're looking at your first completed projects through DSA, are a year and a half to 2 years out from now. So with that being said, there is another type of project, the second type of project, which are projects that are exempt from DSA. And these are typically small projects that do not involve structural systems, fire life safety systems, or access compliance. They are very small, oftentimes painting, re-roofing, doing underground utility work, those kinds of things. And I'll get to a list of what those kinds of projects are. You want to add something?
Nope.
Okay. So this is a list of criteria that kind of could be developed for this school district of projects that might fall into this DSA exempt category of projects. And obviously the first one is that according to DSA, they don't need to be reviewed by them. And there's a very specific list of the projects that are exempt. Project should be a high-need project, and it should be a project that improves the school function or the appearance. Something that could be done relatively quickly. If it's a project that's going to take 2 or 3 years to develop and do, it might as well just be lumped in with another project that is going to DSA as part of a larger project. And maybe most importantly, if you're going to do one of these non-exempt projects, to get something done, it could be a technology project, which is important, or fixing a storm drain that needs to happen right away, and we don't want to wait for the DSA process to play out. It should be a project that has minimal to no impact on a future project at the same facility. You don't want to have to redo something that you just did a year earlier, so we're trying to avoid those kinds of projects. And this is just a quick list of examples of the kinds of projects that are oftentimes exempt from DSA. They're roofing underground stormwater, sewer lines, storm drainage, water piping projects. If you have any security fencing or night lighting projects, those oftentimes fall under that category. And then obviously painting is one, and technology can be another. And DSA required projects is really almost everything. Any significant project in size is going to have most likely a structural, fire, life safety, or an access compliant component to it. And so those will be going to DSA. And so it's important to be aware of the time that it takes to do one of those projects. And then the projects, the non-modernized elementary, secondary, and other facilities that you have, any type of major modernization project is included in the DSA review process. And so I think with that, I'm going to hand it back to Steve to talk about the actual process.
So, as it says there, begin the master plan process for new projects. And so, it's why do we want to have a facilities master plan? Well, what the facilities master plan does is it lays out the foundation and the priorities of how we're going to transform the district's facilities into 21st century learning environments that support the success of Santa Rosa students and adults alike, and also support student learning and achievement. And some of the goals of a facilities master plan are to provide a rational and orderly direction to address existing concerns, provide for existing needs, and then also accommodate future needs of the district, and then to integrate and balance the academic, financial, and technology priorities of the district. In other words, what we want to do is there's three basic questions. Where are we, where do we want to go, and how do we get there? And the timeline for this is that in January and February, this is a proposed timeline now, is for January and February, QKA would develop the project management plan that they talked about in conjunction with district personnel and also the bond team. February to April, do facilities assessment, look at indicators of quality, ways to measure how to prioritize the different items that need to be done, review of the data, and then also get community input. And in April through May, the development of a draft master plan. And then May and June, there'd be additional community input meetings. June and July, they'd finalize the master plan based on the input that they received at the community meetings and from the community. And then in July and August, there'd be board input and anticipated board approval. So is there any questions about the timeline or kind of what the goals or why we want to do that?
The sites are not consulted on this process, or they are?
Did you say sites?
Yeah.
No, they definitely will
They
be.
will be on all of this.
Definitely, yes. That's an integral part of this.
But we don't know, okay, they will be telling us their needs, is that the idea? Because we don't know the district
Correct.
distribution.
Yes, and that's part of the process that QKA will go through, is they will go to each of the sites, they'll do assessment of each of the buildings, literally room by room, but then they'll also talk with administration, staff, custodians, what are, pardon me? Parents, yep. Everybody that we can to, because not only do we want, in community involvement, we need community and parental and staff involvement. I mean, that's a key, because the more information that we gather from more sources, the more complete and comprehensive this facility master plan can be.
And I think that's probably a good segue.
I don't know.
Actually, Richard's going to talk a little bit about the technology bond program.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say how excited I am that we finally got our architect on board, QKA, and be able to work with them as we continue the development of all of our plans for both facilities and technology. And piggybacking on what was said earlier, when we look at technology being exempt from DSA approval, we're really being cognizant of the fact that we want to make minimal impact on future projects. So that's why I'm very happy the architects are on board so we can work collaboratively as we plan some of these projects that we've talked about with the board at previous meetings in terms of high need right now for the district. So we're still looking at those high priority needs that we've discussed in terms of network access, internet access, the connecting of devices to our network at any time in any place. And remember, as we talk about this, only about 30% of any site has that type of coverage now. When you walk onto an elementary school, it's a little bit higher. When you walk onto a secondary facility, it's a little bit lower. So those are some of our initial priorities right out of the gate in order to utilize some of the tools that we already have in our district that aren't functioning properly because of lack of access. We're also looking right now at the devices that we're using in our classrooms and labs, knowing that the majority of our computers are over 6 years old and over 65% of them are still running Windows XP. So we have some big hills to climb on that just to get us to a level, an acceptable level for today, while we're still looking at what we're going to do tomorrow in terms of the bond projects. And then we have some other immediate needs in terms of safety, phone systems, and minimizing single points of failure. We learned this week that a squirrel can actually take us down. And I'm not joking. It was a squirrel that took us down because we have some single points of failure and he collided with a power pole. Which also did other damage in terms of our phone system and some other things because of how it is currently set up. So we want to address those needs now. So in the event that we do have other emergencies or other situations where we need to utilize these services, they will be available. And then we're going to continue the planning that we've already started with many of our groups and committees to set that baseline technology that we'll look at in the spring and into the summer so we can start those projects so we can bring new technologies to the classroom, as well as lowering our student to computer ratio, which right now stands between 8 and 9 to 1. We'd like to drop that ratio down to a better level so there's more accessibility by students. And then building out and continuing to build out our infrastructure to support these initiatives as well as the ones that we will plan with our committees, with our architects, to further what we're able to do with technology in the district. Talking about some of the timeline stuff, we're working on some of that initial stuff right now. Some of it will be coming to the board for some devices next week. Some of the infrastructure upgrades will be coming in the first board meeting in February. Computing devices for the district will be in that February-March timeframe too, so we can start to stage those for implementation during possibly late spring, but summer, ready for the next school year. And then finishing the plan for baseline technology and for subject area and content area specific types of technology. So busy time for us, but we're excited to have this opportunity and looking forward to what we can do with Santa Rosa City Schools.
Any questions?
Rick, the plan that you just sort of laid out, you've had that technology committee in place for how long?
Since last year.
Yeah.
So I've been working that group also with the CCA, Common Core Network Technology Subcommittee, the EdTech Subcommittee, talking to various user groups as well, including front office staff, registers, and counselors, as well as teachers. A lot of discussions with teachers at various meetings about what they're using, right? And we've had a couple of technology fairs where we've had decent turnout, and we'll continue to have a couple more of those over the course of the school year, where we're getting real feedback about tools that could be in the classroom, right? And then taking a lot of emails and phone calls about other technologies that they're interested in exploring.
Thank you.
Frank?
Something that would be helpful, at least to me, and that is when you get to the point at which we've expended our funds, what will the district look like at that point as compared to now? That kind of vision would be helpful for us to communicate publicly what to take place, but all the technical words are great, but it kind of sometimes gets lost on the public. So at some point, we could have that vision from today to where we plan to be at the expenditure of the funds.
Absolutely, I'll put that together.
And piggyback on, I think it's important to note in there exactly how bad it is today, because people don't realize that.
And that's why I brought up some of those numbers, not all of them, just to illustrate that we're still in dire need, even though there has been some spending this year at the site level for new technologies, but it's replacing bad technology, so it's really a neutral in terms of additional technologies.
I think it's important too, the point Rick just made, that definitely the future of what it looks like, but we'll have some significant spending to get to what most people probably assume we have right
Yes.
now, right? Which would be that you don't have more wireless at high schools at a secondary level where students are likely to have devices that need wireless. I mean, those types of things will really be one of the first investments. And we won't be purchasing like new extravagant technology. We have basic computers that are no longer working, so those need to be replaced. And some of the, like the Elmos, that's not necessarily cutting edge yet, but our teachers can't count on that in every classroom all the time, and the projector and all of those things. So I think the first round will really be some of the basics, and the vision, I think, is a great place to hold ourselves, and remembering, and I believe Greg will speak about this, but we have waves of technology money coming, and kind of we'll be staging out how technology looks in the future.
So we also wanted to give you just a little bit more detail on kind of our initial thoughts of what the process of master planning would be. I think the first thing I'll say is that we always try to keep in mind that the goal of this entire process is to engage all the stakeholders in a transparent process that's focused on student needs and identifying what facilities improvements we can make and should make to best benefit the student needs in the classroom on each campus. So we have kind of a few steps that I'll walk through on how we do that. This is kind of our initial proposal. The first thing we'll do is develop what we call a project management plan, which is working together with the district and with this whole team to come up with a clear structure and a clear process for how we're going to go about doing this master plan and make sure we do that collaboratively and that we're all on the same page with that. And that's part of why we're here tonight as well, to get your feedback into that process too. On like you started out with, what information do you need to make decisions? How do you want to see that presented? How do you want to make sure that we engage the community and get that feedback? But to start with just kind of giving you a little bit of where we kind of started thinking about what we talked about in the interview process. So that project management plan would have an organizational structure, have a clear description of roles and responsibilities of the different team members, a clear description of what the community engagement process will be. There's a lot of different options and different ways that we can engage the community in the facilities master planning process, and we want to find the ones that work best for Santa Rosa. A communications plan about how we communicate out what we're doing with the facilities master planning process beyond the people that are directly engaged in the process, how we get that out to the community at large. And then obviously a schedule of how that happens and what the time frame for that is, and making sure all those things work together in a way that's achievable. One of the next key steps that's really related to that is us really getting a really deep understanding of the educational program and the educational goals and what that looks like at every different level. Sometimes that's through digesting information you already have. Sometimes that's through kind of helping facilitate a process to synthesize that information into kind of a clear document that describes the educational plan, so then we can understand what the facilities needs are to support that plan. We always want to drive everything education first and the facilities supporting that. So one of the ways that we do that is through developing something we call indicators of quality. This becomes kind of the foundation of our process by working together with a group of stakeholders with community input to identify what are the things that are most important on each school. What are the key things that every school site should have? How do we, these are the indicators that we're going to evaluate the schools by. And I think it's important to identify those ahead of time and have community input on that, because then we can use that as a baseline to evaluate all the schools equitably and use the same standards and have an objective standard for that and be able to have, both quantitative and qualitative kind of analysis of schools. So
You develop those standards already?
for this school district?
Yes.
No.
That would be based on it, but there are those things with other districts.
Yeah, so we've worked through this process with, and then we have a lot we can start with, and a lot we can build on, and places we can start to frame that discussion about. We want to look at, general physical quality and how appropriate it is educationally, and how well it connects and serves the community, and how well it provides a safe environment, and those kind of things. But what we want to do is work together to very clearly define those, and clearly define kind of what metrics we'll use to evaluate those.
And that would be the rationale for spending more money at one site versus another.
Exactly, so that we have a clear, objective rationale for doing that. Because what's going to happen, a key part of why a facilities master plan is a good thing to do is you have a lot more need than you have money. And you need to have a clear way to decide which are the most important things and have a clear rationale for doing that, and a clear rationale that you can communicate for why you made those decisions, and the goal of the master plan is to provide that rationale, provide that information so that you guys can make those decisions in a way that you are confident in and can communicate the rationale for that. So that's why we feel that's kind of a really key foundational piece for that. And Steve talked about that's one of the first things that we'll do after we have the kind of plan for this in place, is do that and get community feedback on that too. So there's an understanding and a buy-in of that initial piece, because that really kind of sets the stage for everything else. And then in the end, that'll be what we use to not only evaluate facilities, but then prioritize the needs. So the next piece is to assess your existing facilities. And so we'll do that, one, by assessing the physical conditions of your physical buildings. We've done some of that already through the Energy Master Planning Prop 39 work we've done. That covered, those mechanical, electrical, building envelope, window kind of systems. But we'll need to look at landscaping, at other parts of the building, at the infrastructure, some of those kind of things to fill in the parts that we didn't look at as part of that process. We'll also be looking at kind of educational adequacy, so going back to those indicators of quality and seeing where we need to upgrade facilities to meet the needs of the educational program, and where we need to do things to really provide facilities that support 21st century learning, and what that means to Santa Rosa City Schools. And then reviewing all your existing data that you have. You have some planning information that you've done in the past, you have some information about facility needs already. And then there's things like demographics and capacity and things like that we want to build into this too, and the existing data that we have. The next piece is engaging the community in that process. I think it's clear from you guys and from everyone that engaging the community in this process, engaging all of those stakeholder groups, is a really important part of the process. So those stakeholders are kind of, a quick list, which is hopefully fairly comprehensive, but is, the board, you, students, teachers, staff, parents, community members, administrators, community and business leaders, even partner higher ed organizations, all of those kind of stakeholders, so we can engage them in the process. And we talked early on that part of the project management plan will be figuring out the best way to do that. We have a lot of options on how to do that, from surveys to individual meetings to committee meetings. There's a lot of different ways we can do that, and we need to find the best ways for this process to make sure it fits with the timeline, gets the engagement we want, and all of those kind of things. Yeah.
You mentioned Prop $39.
Yes.
So we'll go through that process of identifying the needs and how to expend and where the expenditures will be done. Now also, there could very well be running out of money for that, and there still could be needs, and there's also solar could be identified in the facility projects, and that could all be part of the mix. So you can say general fund dollars.
Yeah, those will all be blended together. That'll be part of the process. We're well on our way. We're just about complete with that Prop 39 process. We have a meeting tomorrow morning to talk about kind of the draft for that and talk about finishing that up. So that'll be underway. It's a small amount of money, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think for the elementary school district, I think it's about $1 million over 5 years. So it's free money. We're going to get that free money, but I don't want anyone to think it's going to be a huge life-saving event.
So then energy will definitely be in the mix.
Yeah, and we've done the work to identify all those projects to reduce energy use as much as possible. So that work will be folded into this and used as part of this process. Back to community engagement. We want to engage all those stakeholders. There's a lot of ways we can do that. We want to work together to find the right ways to do that, and we'll get back to that in a little while, actually, as we have some questions for you. And then we want to also have that clear communication plan. There's some people that will participate in that process, and there's some people that won't, and we want to make sure we reach as many people as possible. Again, there are a lot of ways we can communicate with the community. We want to leverage what you already do to communicate with the community and use those channels, and do everything we can to kind of support that process as well. Then the next step is to pull all this together into a document. You have an example of said document?
I went to my office to get one. So they have done several districts in our state and in our region. And one they spoke about was Vallejo. And Vallejo is a relatively similar sized district. And they actually, in terms of identified values, in terms of instruction, like community schools and wellness, science and technology, I mean, they have some very similar type ideals for their classroom. So they did provide me with a sample master plan, but this is like the level of document that they're going to be creating. and the volume and the scope and the depth. And I want to share a couple of things that really, I think, made the decision, certainly they came forward from the panel, but one of the things that I thought helped with the decision making, because it's such a big undertaking for the facilities master plan, right? It really is the foundation from which all this work's done. One was that, for example, his child is at the Arts Charter, right, and his wife has subbed there. So that's a true commitment to our community. They understand who we are. And then the second was when we asked about community involvement, knowing that that is a keen interest of the board, that many stakeholders are heard. And this process, they shared with, I think it was Vallejo, and maybe even with Ravenswood, that there were times they went back to sites multiple times, and they understood that even if this was the plan, if in the throes of the event it requires more, they're willing to do more. And I think that kind of level of response to the needs of the community and the needs of the board, quite frankly, in terms of what you're expecting, was a very, it was a check mark in their list of things that gave me assurance that this was a good choice for us. Because that's important, that we make sure this is comprehensive, people feel they've been heard, and that a plan comes forward that everybody can believe in.
Well, having a local firm too, you know that there are many areas in this community that they're not heard, or they don't come out to community meetings. So we have schools that are like overrepresented with the squeaky wheel, and then there's the others that, nobody comes out, but there still is tremendous need, and if you talk to a parent one-on-one, well, of course I want that. So you need to figure out how to get those people out. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot about that community engagement plan, and it may be that we have different strategies in different parts of the district, because, one's gonna be effective here, and that's not gonna be effective here, and we need to approach it differently, and that's absolutely what we want to discuss and what we want to identify, and make sure that we get right at the beginning, so we have a clear plan and we can then execute that. And so that's the kind of end result document, but what that includes is master plans for each site that express kind of a long-term vision of how facilities can support education, a list of facilities improvements that are prioritized and that have costs associated with them. And then the piece that's related to that is what we call an implementation plan. And that's because the facilities master plan is going to identify a large amount of projects that's going to be larger than the bond. And the implementation plan will then explain and identify which projects will be funded when, with the funding that's available. And so that's a key piece of that builds on what we talked about earlier with prioritization and indicators of quality. And then I think another important piece is to have a clear record of the process that we've gone through. And so that can be communicated out to everyone, and there's a record of these are all the meetings we had, and this is who attended them, and this is the process that we've been through. In a general sense, you'll see in that document there's a pretty good introduction that describes all the different pieces we went through, includes what we call an educational specifications, which is that program kind of aspect of it. But then, there's also another piece that I don't know if it's in that binder, but it has like all the minutes from all the meetings, and there's all of that kind of documentation. That's the backup information that led to this.
Well, that's
plan.
important to the bond oversight committee too, correct?
It is, yeah. And I think it's important for the community too, and just anyone who wants to see that process.
Yeah, like we
understand
did
what's
invite
going
you,
on.
see, we don't invite you here.
And I think too, one more thing we stressed, is that yes, we do want this to be done in as quick a time frame as possible, but not at the sacrifice of including people and making sure it's done right, because we only have the dollars to spend once, and we want to make sure that you have the information you need, that it's thorough and comprehensible. And so that, while we have a timeline, they certainly know, and they'd be communicating regularly, so we know it won't be a surprise. But it's not about finishing by that deadline. It's about having a product we all believe in and that will guide the investment of these dollars in the future.
Just as a quick summary, I think just emphasizing that it's important to engage the community and all stakeholders in this process. That we want to make sure we provide that long-term vision of how facilities can support educational goals in a changing, educational world that we live in as well. And that prioritization is a big part of this. And that's a key piece that we try to focus on through the master planning process. We don't want to give you just a a big plan that you can't achieve. We want to give you a roadmap for what the first piece of that is and how to get to there as well. And then, that results in a comprehensive plan to guide these facility projects and guide facilities planning into the future beyond this one.
Any questions, comments? Okay.
Well, I do have a little.
Okay.
You mentioned landscaping, and that makes me think of other stuff. When we have built facilities in the past, that is schools, a lot of places, we always are concerned about the curb appeal that would have for parents and students and people who work there. But there's also a balance in what you can actually maintain as a facility. And all these campuses, I'm just thinking of Elsie Allen right now, used to be wonderful landscape, but it's all gone. So hopefully in your factoring into the construction, also factoring into an idea as to how we can maintain what was being created for us.
Yeah, so I think another piece of this process, another input in this process is working with Jeff and the maintenance team as part of the process as well, and we've done that already in looking at your school site. But then, I think that's part of us as a firm of, almost 50 people that do only schools. And so that's the kind of work that we do, and we know about the constraints that districts have for maintenance and understanding that there's a balance there that we need to meet, and between making this, making a place beautiful and warm and inviting, but also making it so that it can continue to be warm and inviting into the future, and making sure that
So one of the things too, just about the facilities master plan is, when we're discussing how frequently to update the board, and it could be where we have standing board items every other month. We know that they're gonna come forward, or every month, whatever we decide, that they're gonna come forward in public, talk about where we are, what they've been doing, how it's been going. We know where they live, so we know they can come. And just kind of really keeping everybody in the loop at every step of the way. And as they said, kind of working with Rick and working with the mechanisms we have in place to communicate now, really making sure our website is robust. We, have created these websites about the bonds, making sure they're robust, that information is there, it's easy to find, it's intuitive, translating what we have to, doing all the things we need to do to make sure the entire community feels a part of this process for every step of the way.
It's important.
And now we're going to turn it over to Greg Isom from Isom Advisors.
All right. So when we're talking about the capital facilities program funding, there's different ways for school districts to access money. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about measures I and L and how it's going to work. And obviously QTA can probably talk about the funds, federal funds, Prop 39 state funds, which pretty much don't exist right now, do they?
The Prop 39 funding is there.
Oh, sorry,
It's
state
the
funds.
state,
Yeah.
the structure matching funds that don't exist anymore.
Okay. Crossing our fingers that they do. So right now I'm going to talk about how do we access bond funds, how do you sell bonds, and what does it kind of all mean in regard to timing, okay? So pretty much what the voters did was they gave you the authority to sell up to $224.5 million, okay? And so what they're saying is, when you have your needs, you can sell those dollars, okay? And so when I presented to the board, I want to say maybe back in April of last year, we had some preliminary plan that said that we're going to be selling $50 million in 15, $48 million in 18, and $49 million in 21 for the high school district, 13, 14, plus or minus. And then we had some money set aside for technology, and these technology bonds that we discussed were going to be these short-term bonds with hardly any interest to match the useful life of the asset. And we specifically went over this entire plan with the Taxpayers Association, which is why I believe they went neutral, which is great. Okay? So what we have here, as I said, preliminary schedule last year looked like this. As of right now, it's still going to look exactly the same until I'm told otherwise. Okay? And so what does this mean is, just because this is what the schedule says doesn't necessarily mean this is exactly how it's going to happen. It's going to happen based on what the needs of the district are, okay? So there's going to be communication between me and the administration, me and the board, especially me and the architect, to determine what type of funding can we actually access to implement this plan. Because what I have to manage and balance on my end is one, what's your tax rate? But since we're limited to this $30 tax rate, you can't go over, because if you go over the $30 at any given point, the law says you can't even sell bonds if you have them available, okay? So we want to manage this tax rate. We also want to manage the fact that you can actually spend this money within a certain period of time. And the IRS says that you're supposed to spend your money within a 3-year period, okay? And also, and I'm sure the RQK will agree with this, you want to be able to sell bonds that you can actually manage the process with, right? So when LA Unified, passes a bond for $7 billion, they don't sell all $7 billion because it's unmanageable. Okay, so there's a matter of timing on how much time can the administration dedicate to this, how much time can the architects, how does it work with the flow of classrooms, with the summer, how does this all work? So as of right now, this is the initial plan. And at some point, when we get closer, when the facilities master plan is done, they'll probably contact me, or the administration will contact me saying, hey, Greg, actually for phase 1, is it possible to get $60 million? And my answer is going to be, of course, we can get $60 million, and now I'm going to have to rework this entire plan. So this plan is literally going to change every single year based on what the needs of the district are, based on what your assessed valuation does, and based on what current interest rates are, okay? So you'll see that's for facilities up top, and very small print up the top, it says subject to change.
God, that is really tiny, really tiny.
What do you mean it has to be spent within 3 years? You mean the decision of how to spend it has to be made?
So when you actually, when all the bond documents are going through, correct me if I'm wrong, Meredith, at some point you're probably going to ask administration and say, okay, is there an expectation that you're going to spend this money within 3 years?
Yeah, the tax code has a provision that says that in order to issue tax exempt debt, the amount that you issue, you have to have a reasonable expectation on the day you issue the bonds that you can spend the money in 3 years.
I see.
It's a protection from overburdening the market with tax exempt debt.
And it's not from November of 2014 when the bonds were passed, it's from each
No,
time the bonds
when
were
you
sold.
from the date that a series of bonds is issued.
And it's also set up because legally, the school district, you're allowed to collect interest on the bonds when they sit, at the county level for the next 3 years. And after that, you don't get to collect interest on it. So I mean, that's not to say that if you don't spend all your money within 3 years, the IRS is going to come knocking on your door. I mean, I've known districts who have held their money for 9 years, 10 years. I don't recommend it because ultimately what you're doing is you're taxing your community unnecessarily and it's just sitting there. They're paying on it and they're not seeing any improvements. Okay? So as I said, this is going to change, guaranteed, probably next year. And so you'll be getting updates all the time from me about what that looks like. Yes?
I believe I read, Governor Brown is planning to do a facilities bond.
Governor Brown is trying to be convinced to do a facility. He doesn't want to do it.
He doesn't want
Brown
to.
doesn't want to do it.
If it's cash, he has the proposal. Yeah.
They would do that through, I think through the Attorney General's office, try to do an initiative.
Yeah. And that would get back to your first slide where it says state matching funds, which are TBD. To be determined. Right now, there aren't state matching funds. There are various proposals to potentially have those funds in the future. We're very familiar with that process and keep very close tabs on what that happens. So if at any point there are funds that you can qualify, that'll be part of what will help the district is to make sure at this point there aren't really those funds out there.
Part of the 2015-16 proposed budget, actually, the governor talked about increasing the limit on the tax rate. We don't know what that would mean or what the number would be, whether it's already passed. Potentially that $30 tax rate cap might change.
Like go down?
No, go up. Because there's no state facilities on, increase local laws, the ability of school districts.
And also when Prop 39 was enacted in 2000, the thinking was that it has a $30 tax rate and $60 for unified school districts. It needs to keep up with inflation as well, so maybe we'll raise the tax rate up and allow school districts to ask voters for more. Okay. So as I said, this is kind of the initial plan. We have $42 million, which is right now allocated to technology. And once again, that could obviously change. Or if Rick says we don't need that much in the next 3 or 4 years, we can probably put some of that for some facility dollars. So we actually have 14 million dedicated to the elementary school district right now, and $28 million dedicated to the high school district in regards to technology and short-term notes. Okay. So when it comes to the actual timeline, this is an example, and the reason I have this example is just because it's literally whenever I get the call from the administration saying let's get some money in the bank right now, this is typically the timeline that it takes. So administration is going to give me the information saying, hey, we need 50 million or 40 million for the high school district. Let's kick this off. We will then get in contact with Meredith Johnson, who then will get a resolution and the official statement. If you recall, when we did the refi back in December, there was the POS, the preliminary official statement, which is like a prospectus that goes out to investors. It's kind of the same process that goes on. Unfortunately, we'll have to go to the rating agency again at some point, just because they say that if you are stale for 5 months or so, or 4 months, you have to go back to them and get your bonds rated. So then once we get the actual rating, we'll post it and then price the bonds, and then you'll receive funds. If you were to say, let's start this next month or in March, you'd have funds by July. And so based on whenever I get the call from you guys, this is kind of going to be the timeline that we follow. Questions about the bond process, accessing funds, tax rate, debt?
Is there a difference in that? So these short-term bonds to fund technology, are we going to pay a higher interest rate on short-term bonds, or lower interest rates?
Way lower.
Way lower. And
I mean, when you do, the
do you
difference.
have the same amount of time to spend them?
Yes. I mean, as I said, when it comes to the actual interest rate, when you sell like a 3 to 5 year bond, I just did an analysis for another school district when we're talking about $100 million, and the total interest was about $9 million. Okay? When you talk about a 30-year term for that same $100 million in principal, it's about $100 million in interest.
Oh, wow.
It's a significant amount of money, but obviously the reason why you have to do longer terms is because that's what it takes in order to generate more funds. And so that's why there's been a lot of talk, especially matching up the term of the bond with the actual length of however the asset's going to be. So originally what school districts used to do, and most school districts still do it today, is you would do a 30-year term, and you would allocate in the first 3 or 4 years the principal to be funded for the technology, and then years 6 through 12 would be to pay for the roof, and then years 13 through whatever would be paying for upgrades and modernization. And while some school districts do that, some say I'd rather make it crystal clear to everyone in the community that this is how it's going to be dedicated.
So Rick will be suggesting how much to spend this year, all the way. How long do you see that process spreading out? Over how many years? Or is that too early?
Well, initially, like we were talking about with Socorro, is we have something that we need to do just to get to an acceptable standard. So we've front-loaded a portion because we know we're going to have to spend more to get to that level. And then what I worked with Greg on is then spacing it out over time. I think it was, Greg, correct, I think we did it on 5 sales after that or 4 sales after that, where it would be enough to do technology refreshes along that way.
How many years between the sales?
It was between
3 to 5.
3 to 5, depending on what type of technology we were talking about.
And what kind of, you're going to be the one shopping for us, right? Getting us lending institutions?
Shopping for you?
Well, you're going to try to. So I like to think of that
Yeah,
that way.
I'm the guy who's going to be managing your bond process, correct? Yes.
So what kind of lending institutions work with schools? And any different?
Well, when we did the RFP for underwriters for the refinancing of the bonds, we sent out RFPs to the top 3 or 4 underwriters who do mostly school district bond sales in California, but they're also national firms. And so when we get down to selling, bonds for this deal, we'll take a look and see what the current market environment is. And maybe there's 2 different sales to do, competitive or negotiated sale. And then we'll make a determination on what fits the needs of the district. And if we do the negotiated sale process, maybe do another RFP, see how these underwriters are performing with the financing right now, to determine how well they perform in regards to interest rates with their investors nationwide.
The institution you select isn't actually purchasing your bonds as an investment, they're purchasing them for resale to investors.
Okay, and then, so, for example, what is the bond rate now if we just went out?
The bond rate, we do not have a bond, we haven't sold them yet.
But let's say.
Right now, we're actually at
50%.
0.02% from historic lows in the history of bonds. You're probably in the 2 to 3% range overall.
Okay, so now the bond rate 5 years from now goes up to 5% or, so they reset,
No,
those are locked.
when you sell bonds, you lock in your rate
Okay.
for whatever the term is.
So it's not, you don't.
But when you sell a bond, let's just say 5 years later, you then have to go resell it and lock in whatever those current rates are for that
So
time.
it's not fixed, it's locked.
Correct.
It's
Thank
fixed.
you for that question.
Like a
It's
mortgage.
fixed and locked. It's
Correct.
like a mortgage, it's fixed and locked.
I'm on.
Non-variable rate.
Very
That's
Okay.
Don't get rid of my slide deck. So what we'd like to do, kind of for the balance of our time here, is actually, this is where it gets a little bit more personal for the board, where you guys have to think, and as you look ahead, you'll see there's some questions that we have for you. But we really want to talk about roles and responsibilities, and just to kind of put you at ease, these are rhetorical questions, we're not expecting answers this evening, but things for the board to think about it as we begin to move forward as having the right to participate in this process, actually. So this particular slide shows some of the things, and this is a very obviously abbreviated list of things, but on the left-hand side, things the board may want to be involved in. So what is the actual structure of the facilities plan, the facilities program, engaging with the fiduciary part that Greg was just talking about. And then participate, how do you want us to communicate with the community at large? And, give us input on that. So on the administrative side, like administration along with the rest of the team, making sure that we're complying with the program as it's been set forward, making sure we're maximizing our resources in terms of the dollars and the various funding sources and other things, and really to coordinate this entire effort and to keep the board informed of what's going on. So this is the part that's kind of for discussion, and we're here to help you with this. And one of the very first questions is, at what level do you want to work as a board? Again, as we probably expressed a number of times this evening, this is a very large and complex process, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. And there are many, many, many decisions that are going to have to be made. So the question that we're asking you to think about is, at what level do you want to work, and at what points do you want to be consulted and asked about? So just to think about that. Certainly, as it's worked in other school districts, and we work with probably 50 schools around the state, around the Bay Area, one of the things that we see is consistently, the board always sets the objectives, the overall objectives. What is it that we're trying to achieve, and what are the policies that go along with that? So, for instance, Vallejo, I'll use as an example, one of the board policies as we were going forward is they really wanted to improve the STEM programs. As a matter of fact, they wanted a STEM lab in every single school. But that was an educational objective set by the board, and they said, this is what you want to do, this is our policy. And then, it's up to the facilities team to go ahead and make sure that that's implemented in each of the sites. So, again, at what level do you want to work with staff and advisors to create educational goals, desired outcomes? Maybe, again, since we're just coming in new to this, maybe some of this work has been done already with a strategic plan, with some other educational specifications or goals that you already set forward. But again, what are those desired outcomes? And having you let us know what's important to you as the board.
Do you want to say something?
Comments?
I guess my question is that if there are big ticket items that really correlate with big programmatic decisions, at what point do we do we discuss those, like, and I guess the example that I'm thinking of right now is like Lewis, are we gonna do something with Lewis, or is it, that seems like that's a very big dollar figure if we are gonna do something with it, but it's not just, you're not gonna fix it up for the sake of fixing it, you're gonna fix it up because it's programmatic, so that seems to be like the kind of decision that should be made sooner rather than later, 'cause it,
Yeah, I think that's a good example of setting overall objectives. You can set a policy decision that we're gonna implement these programs at Lewis. And then that gives us the direction to say, okay, so now we need to decide, we need to determine, this is the program we want, this is the facility we want, what do we need to do with this facility to get it to that point? But you set the overall objective, we want this facility to support this educational program. And then we can come back with, okay, we considered that and done our work, and this is the plan to do that. Does that make sense?
yeah, right, and so it does seem like there's some things that we need to talk about, I would think soon, like, are there facility needs that go along with our desire to create community schools and more options for community schools, and that, are those discussions that we need to have soon, or when do we need to have them, or what do we need from, Socorro to know, like, what the facility.
Where do we start?
Right.
And it might be that, full service community schools is a good example, we dealt with that, with Vallejo too, that's a key goal for them. And so what they did is they told us that our goal is to have full service community schools at each community school. And as part of the process of developing their educational specifications, we asked a lot of questions about that. What does that mean? What do you need to do that? What about this? What about that? And we came up through that process that really, as it says, that at each school, for full service community schools, we need a few conference rooms throughout the schools where we can have meetings with service providers and parents in schools. We need extra offices in the front in the administrative area that can be itinerant offices for these different service programs to come in and see. We need a very clear and welcoming sense of entry to the school so that it feels comfortable for families to come there. So that was the district setting, or the board setting a goal of, or a policy of implementing for service community schools. And what we can do is help you figure out what facilities are needed to do that. So I think that's a good example of probably what we meant with setting overall objectives and policy, that you're setting that educational goal, that desired outcome. But you don't necessarily, in that case, the board wasn't directing how that goal is met. They were relying on us to make a recommendation for how that goal is met and then approving that recommendation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes.
And I'm not saying that's how we have to do things here. I'm just using that as an example that happens to correlate very much with what you're talking about.
It still seems rather nebulous and vague, and so I think maybe we would start with reference to our strategic plan and what we have there, what we have in the LCAP. And when you say begin the master plan process, that will also start to crystallize things too, I think as well. And getting input from the principals, the staff there, the families, it's a tremendous amount of work. So I would think that we would have to have, as a board, additional meetings during this time.
Well, that's what I
Because
think.
they can't do anything without us giving them direction.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking too, because most of my questions, I think, although that was really helpful, that, just describing that process and your part in that. On the other hand, like, I can say, I think as a board, we said that we want to prioritize full service community schools, but I don't know that we decided that beyond Cook, what else are we doing? Are we doing another one? Are we, what, again, like going back to Lewis, what are we doing with that side? I think there's some sort of big policy decisions where we have general philosophy, agreement on general philosophy, but not sort of the step in between that and you guys.
And I would think it has to be fluid, because let's say we went with full community services as Vallejo did, at the expense of what? What does that cost to put in this compared to what is the need, you're being told is the need of that site by the sake of staff and the community.
Yeah.
So all those have to be weighed and measured as to decisions.
Yeah.
I don't know quite how you do that.
I think one thing that's critical is there's no point in which this dialogue or this input stops. It's going to be continuous and there'll be a process. I think one of our next slides is talking about the process in which we communicate with you and how that happens and establishing what that will be. But it will be an ongoing process. process. It will be that, you know, you might say, we want to do full service community schools, we decided we want to do this, and we want to do this, and we want to do this, and then we'll, through the process that we described, come back with, okay, so here's all those things are, and you can make some choices about how to do that, and having a, you know, there'll be another discussion about, here are those indicators, and we can talk about which ones are more important so that we can facilitate that
So
process.
those would be
You
board
want to say something, Frank?
choices.
I thought you started. Are you done? Can I ask, can Frank speak? Yes, she said,
Permission
finally,
was given.
yes.
So there has been, I think, ample discussion amongst the board about what community schools look like.
Good.
I think at conferences and such, the board has spent ample time in looking at schools that have similar programs.
Good.
I would like personally to see community school philosophy permeate all of our campuses. I would like to see health centers at all of our secondary school sites, because there's huge need, and we have great disparity between providing services not uniform throughout the whole district. Part of it's the equitable comment that was made earlier as well, very important about that. I guess what I envision may not be what somebody else envisioned, but it's also limited by what the capacity of our partners are to build a community facility district-wide. And so that's where your services would be really helpful in making those contacts with county and city services, because we could easily overwhelm their present organization with our particular needs, I think. My guess is that would be the case.
So, for
100% sure.
instance, you're talking about like social advocates for youth, community action partnership, SCO,
Or even
right?
like the county
The
itself,
county.
their
County
health
services.
services, for
Okay.
example, right? We could, well, in fact, we do want, we've shared with them, we'd love to have federally qualified health centers on every campus. They can't keep up with us, right? They neither have the personnel nor the money, nor, I mean, you know, just, because they've never seen us as a partner in this way before. So part of it is having facilities, I think that, like you were saying, like shared office space, and that doesn't have to be used only for this, but it kind of, we envision a site where
Multi-use rooms.
where people are collaborating. Like if we think in our classrooms, for example, collaboration is a key to the 21st century learning, right? Then our classrooms aren't built for that space. We don't have lecture halls. We don't have same quality science labs in every school, right? So those are the types of discussions, I think. And I think part of it is the board saying this is our priority, and then the board needing to let go and let the stakeholders all talk about what it means to them, and let them bring that analysis back and say, okay, yes, this is what we thought, no, this isn't what we thought. You know, this iterative process, you have an idea, but kind of letting the stakeholders say this is what it means to me. For example, college and career ready. We know the idea, one of the ideas that's important to every school has been college and career hubs. And we might get some support from the SCO grant, but where's that gonna go? What would that look like? What's important for people? And if the board, I think, has said it's important college and career, but we don't know, we don't have a firm idea because we haven't spoken to all our layers of people of what needs to be in that space. And then can we design it? Where would that go? What would that look like? Right, and so I think that's the iterative process of getting stakeholders involved, but the board saying these are some of our priorities, and then letting it go to see how much we could handle. So, yeah.
And then the other issue the board has spent considerable time talking about is the safety on the campuses. And there is an underlying desire that we have lockable spaces that many districts have that we don't have uniformly throughout our district. So the question is, how do we implement those things that seem to me to be urgently needed, and integrating into the campus beautification, remodeling, or new facilities? And how do you, there's a timing issue there. But I think there needs to be an emphasis placed upon that particular discussion and goal.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that, you know, the board would say to us, is that this is an important issue. We want this dealt with earlier rather than later. And so we begin to take that with the mind that we've got some things coming on afterwards, but this is an important issue that we need to take care of.
Like
That's a good
doors,
example.
windows, locks, I mean, all of those come into.
Security fencing.
Mhm.
So, I have a speaker card. Margie?
I just had a question about how long it takes to put together the facilities master plan.
Each one is very different,
Just
obviously.
give me a
but
ballpark, are we
a
talking
ballpark-
5 years, are we talking 3
No.
years?
Oh,
Are we
no,
talking-
I think the Vallejo plan that you see on the desk there was, I can't remember exactly, but 6 to 9 months, somewhere in that ballpark.
Thank
And
you
the
so much.
timeline that we have proposed for this is that it would come back to the board for input and approval in either July or August at this point is what the timeline is.
Thank you.
And again, if it needs to be extended,
Yeah.
because something, because that's the feedback we get, then
Yeah.
it'll be extended, but it's not gonna take forever.
No,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the two ends.
yeah, and that's part of setting up that plan initially too, is back, because there's gonna be a balancing need between what that process is in the timeline. You can have a master plan that took 5 years, but if you really wanted to, but I don't think that serves anyone's interest best, and there's a balance between that and finding that getting and making sure we're on
So, actually, we'll skip the first bullet for the moment, because the second bullet is, I think, germane to this conversation, which is, one of the things we'll ask you to do is, as decisions come up on whatever the issue may be, and you want input, we ask you to say to us as a team, this is the information we need to make decisions about Lewis School, or about security, or those sort of things. So that is one of the roles that we see as the board, and as an important role, to make sure that we're giving you the information that you need to make informed decisions and good quality decisions. So, again, moving on to the community piece, how is it that you would like us to engage the community? Just again, this is a rhetorical question. We've done community forums. We've done social media sort of things. We've done outreach through regular press outlets and that sort of thing. So, again, thinking about what has worked well for this district in the past, in your thoughts about, how that should occur. So that's something we ask you to think about.
I think it's important to get feedback from you, because we've done community forums where they've been wonderful and they've been a complete bust. And I think that in the interest of time, if you have something going on that we've never done before, I'd be interested in hearing about that. And the whole social media thing, I think that we don't use that enough in our district because we don't have all the technology. But that would be something that I think we'd all be interested in pursuing as well. Maybe get a much greater response, because it's easy for people who don't have to come to a meeting.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's also about having a blend of things too. And making sure, and there's gonna be, I'm sure there will be times where we wanna have community forum kind of effects, but you also wanna do those in a way, when you're trying to engage that many people, you have to do it in a very targeted way, right? You can't be too open-ended, you can't have a discussion, because you can't have a discussion with 150 people. And so
they tried.
Well, let's say you can't have an effective discussion with 150 people. But, and so you want to think about how you use each one. If you want to have a really in-depth discussion and work collaboratively, then you can do that with a site committee group that's, 10 to 12 people. And maybe do that over a series of meetings so that you can develop a relationship and tackle complex ideas. If you want to share out information and get general feedback, you can do that in a community forum effectively. And there are ways to do that more or less effectively within each of those pieces. There are also tools for doing surveys. You guys have done surveys as part of the bond process, but using that kind of process to engage a much wider set of people in an analytical way can be something that's useful too. There's probably data from the bond survey that you did that will be useful about what types of projects. Usually that's something that's part of that. That's something we used as part of the Vallejo process too, that drove part of the thinking as well. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. We can have groups that represent a group of schools, whether that's the schools of a certain type or in a certain region or different things like that, if that makes sense. That's exactly kind of one of the first things that we'll be discussing is we have this menu of options, what makes sense where, how can we best mix and match to, balance between being effective and meeting that timeline and really engage. We want to engage everyone, but we need to do it in the right way that makes it useful and effective.
Frank.
Well, each campus would have probably a different climate as far as what motivates people to show up and participate. I mean, some campuses, you have food, they show up. Some just naturally show up anyway. I mean, it's just every campus runs differently. So I guess it's really important for you all to have identified for you who the campus leaders are amongst the faculty, the administration, and the parents. Because they all have a different way of operating. It's sort of amazing. What would work on one campus would not work at the other, and it could be separated by a few blocks. It's just amazing.
Yeah, that's not all that uncommon. It really is. We find that to be actually a universal truth. Because every Ravenswood is a good example of every one of those schools is different. They operate differently, so.
And they're all in a 3-block radius.
Yeah, it's a very small geographic school district, but it's fascinating from school to school how they differ. And then, this was already brought up, is how do we do this? How do we engage with you so again, this is something we'd like you to think about. Is it something that you'd like reports that, regularly scheduled board meetings as an agendized item that we come forward? The advantage of that, of course, is that we were able to come and talk with you about that, but because, board meetings are televised, they can get out to the larger public as well, so that's one way to outreach. But there are some limitations to a regular board meeting as well, and you may prefer this kind of format on a regular basis where we can just sit down and talk for a couple hours about, issues that are coming up during the process. So it may be one or the other or both.
Combination of the
Or a
both.
combination of, some form of that. So again, that's something to think about how you'd like to engage with us.
When did you say you thought you'd have a draft of the kind of overall project management plan? What did you commit to?
I think we said that process would take about a month.
It seems like that would be an important meeting, and maybe that's another study session, because it
Absolutely.
definitely feels like some of the questions, probably we need some tangible examples, because
Absolutely.
everything seems like a yes, but everything can't be a yes, so the examples might really help.
I think that's an excellent point in which, I think the points where we'll need to have a really deep discussion are there when we kind of finalize the indicators of quality. At that point, that's a really important kind of milestone. And then when we get into draft plans and kind of where we're at once we do all the assessment and developing those initial plans too.
Well, one of the things you mentioned using our little board meetings as a time to have these conversations. That'd be great. But I also think that as we go down the road here a little bit, I would like to see more form and definition placed upon our bond oversight committee, who they are, what their functions are, what their duties are, to be real crystal clear as to what they are, who they are, and what they're doing. Even before that period of time, in the planning time. Because I think it's helpful if the committee's going to be involved with oversight, I think it'd be helpful to see what the intention and desire of the board was, and they aren't here. Just to get an idea of where we're going and what we want to accomplish. And hopefully we can perhaps have board reports that would come to the board from time to time from the oversight committee, just so that we get an opportunity to ask questions and get answers in a public forum, exercising our transparency.
Is that, I'm all for that, but my question is, the bond oversight committee they're responsible for making sure we're adhering to what bond that we passed.
Correct.
Their job is dissemination of information to the community. Their job is not to oversee projects as they're undertaken or to help decide which projects to undertake.
The bond oversight committees also review what takes place in the district, such as change orders that go on, to make sure they are valid, consistent.
To make sure they're consistent with the bond project.
Correct.
That's it.
And
We're
we
evaluating
definitely,
what we already decided
Correct. They're not making decisions for you.
about what we're gonna do.
right, this is
Right,
the
that's just where I want to
decision
make that
making.
distinction.
If you wanted to give some community group some oversight on project decisions, I might suggest that you separated that committee from your bond oversight committee, just so that it's very clear to your oversight committee members what their responsibilities are.
And I think this first slide, or second slide, that's what you meant when you have this little group of people over here, right? And you have a,
Yeah, but
this is oversight committee is
it's a
here.
group of the community that gets to oversee how you spent your money, and whether it was in, how you spent your money once it's already been spent. Making sure that it was in accordance with the project on your Prop 39 voter approved project list. Right.
And it's really just that one task that they have, right?
Right.
And that's set in statute, right?
Correct.
That's
That's
put
in the
in laws,
education code. Yes.
that's put in law what they do. what they
And who
don't.
can even be part of it, like employees can't be part of it,
No.
right?
Employees,
And you
vendors,
have to have a
spouses.
retiree, you have to have a taxpayer association person, you have to, and we will be bringing forward that group.
Because that's something that's been missed in the past. I don't think there ever was a presentation from the bond oversight committee to the full board.
No,
The
never,
dialogue
I've
or
never heard,
discussion.
right, all these years I've never heard
So
from them.
now that we're starting afresh and new, it'd be nice to establish that as a desire that we would like to have.
But
Isn't
it's-
that also in statute, it's a
Yes,
quarterly requirement?
there's an annual report that the oversight committee presents to the board.
But if you wanted a quarterly report,
Right?
or it could have been in writing.
Oh,
and,
yeah, like something like that.
I'm sure something.
But I
will
get what,
happen.
I get what Frank is saying, and then the other thing that I think would be nice, and I think is what he's alluding to, is also, and I don't know how we go about doing this, because you don't want to create a group that now thinks that they have equal power as the whole other board.
And you're creating a process here where you're deciding who's gonna give input into which projects are done, and they're gonna give you a product that's gonna have, as they said, a rational basis for why you decided to do the project. You don't wanna then empower this other group to say, oh wait, but we think you should spend that.
Especially because they oftentimes do not agree with the priorities of.
And they're community representatives, they're not district representatives.
And it doesn't look like you are recommending establishment of any subcommittees.
Not necessarily, no.
I would-
Jen?
We saw a draft of the application for the oversight committee, but is there a final one yet? I mean, when's it gonna be, do we vote
We had an
on it?
oversight committee yet?
No.
The process, what happens is, the district needs to certify the election results, that is, take the official results from the county and enter them into your minutes. That starts a 60-day clock ticking for having the Citizens Oversight Committee established. So we would need to get further down the road with getting the Citizens Oversight Committee established before we certify the election results. In terms of the Citizens Oversight Committee, you need to hold a meeting prior to issuing Series A of your bonds. So the Citizens Oversight Committee's responsibility really is, since it's overseeing the expenditure of bond proceeds, since you don't have any bond proceeds yet, they don't have a role yet.
I just wanna know if there's an application yet that someone can fill out.
No.
Sorry.
But thank you for that additional information, I appreciate it.
Anything else?
Any other
Okay.
questions? So, yeah, we'll just go through these last couple of slides
Okay.
pretty quickly. So, again, there's a lot of things to do, but we thought we'd just begin to list a few of the next steps, and you can see them here. We talked about the non-DSA projects, if there's some that we need to get going. Just talked about the bond oversight, getting that going, beginning to get our committees together. Again, we've already done this part, but authorize us to get working on the master plan. The sale of bonds, which Greg talked about, just making sure that we get everybody in place as we need to. And one of the people that you might want to consider is a facilities director, because as this begins to wind up, as we said, it's a lot of work. And, Steve and Jeff already have full-time jobs. And so, having somebody that really we can rely on as a district liaison person is somebody that we work with as a representative to the school district and have them be available to us is really an important piece. So that's something that you may want to think about.
Okay. And would be in addition to someone's current, I should be asking these guys, in addition to someone's current job, or is it?
It's a standalone job.
Standalone job.
Paid for out of bond.
Okay.
For
Have we talked about
bond work.
No. Okay.
For the period of the time that we are spending bond money, which is a while.
That's done in almost all the school districts we work with, because school districts just don't have extra
Right.
personnel to assign to something like
Right.
this. So just about every school district we work with. Sometimes it's an in-house person, sometimes it's a consultant. But in either case, it can be paid for out of bond persons.
And I think that's, we do a lot of, obviously, this kind of work, and I think the capacity of the district to make decisions, to manage, to participate in that process. And, there's a certain amount of work that we can do to help with that, which is a lot, but there's part of that we can't do because we're not the school district. And that capacity of the district is sometimes an issue, and that can sometimes be a limiting factor in how quickly we can move and stuff and how effective it is.
So this is somebody with a business background, or it's not an educator?
No,
Facilities management.
It's more facilities.
It's more
professionals.
facilities driven,
and then this is somebody we want to, I mean, we don't want to drive Steve and Jeff crazy, because right out of the bat, you know, we're going to begin to engage whoever this is. So this is actually somebody I think we'd like to have in place as soon as possible, because we're going to hit the ground running, and that's going to be a lot that needs to be done.
Okay.
Well, we haven't really had that level of participation in the past, but I can see that it would benefit the district to do that. So I would support that, and I guess it depends upon the recommendation of the superintendent. But I think it would flow a lot easier if you had a point person that followed it, that had a background.
Well, and especially at a time when M&O and business, I mean, it's not the department it was. It's significantly reduced in terms of staff, and I think we're stretched in today's world, let alone this world, right?
So I think
That makes
what you're
sense.
hearing is we're going to have something back from you in terms of making that happen,
Right.
okay?
And then the last step is, again, some of the things for administration to do to get things going. And a lot of these are sort of taking that direction from the board and essentially making them happen, so. Let me do that. I think that's it.
That's the last one.
So any other questions, comments? We're all okay?
No, I think I really got a nice, clear understanding. I'm glad I had this presentation.
It was really nice to have you all here
Thank you.
and talk about all this at one time, so thank you.
And we did tape it. We will put it up on our website, so that everybody can kind of share this information. And I would say, generally speaking, you know, save your third Wednesday, because potentially we'll be having meetings. And I do see what we'll bring forward, and probably after we see, yeah, and you guys too, save your third Wednesday. Yeah, thank you. Is a combination of the two, some at public meetings, and then also study sessions for the deep, more in-depth kind of discussions where the board has further questions, has some policy clarification. But then in public, kind of regular standing updates about where they are in their process and those type of things, so that we can have that firmly recorded as well.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is how construction heavy, like that, on related, very quickly.
It's the week of the